In the history of humanity, we have never come across a verified hybrid human that was half human and half angelic. And, although there are many myths of centaurs, mermaids, minotaurs, and sirens, which are alleged creatures that were half human and half bird, fish, or reptile, to this day there is still no hard evidence of such mythical creatures ever existing, nor were the remains of these alleged creatures ever discovered. Why is this the case? Why is there no remains of these creatures? Because despite the wild imaginations and stories created by ancient people, God has put a law in place since the foundation of the earth, a law that establishes a natural boundary which prevents each biblical kind from reproducing outside of its own fixed boundaries. Therefore, men cannot mate with dogs, horses, apes, fish, or birds, because that would be outside of the human species boundary. Now, that also means that angels cannot mate with humans either. Even if angels did have the capacity to procreate, it would be impossible. So, our first reason why angels cannot have children with humans is because God established a law preventing such crossbreeding from happening among His creation. Reason number 2 for why angels cannot have children. Because angels are spirits that cannot reproduce a human. Angels do not have God's power to create, so it is impossible for these spirit beings to create a fleshly human. Jesus said these spirit beings do not have flesh and bone, which means they would not have blood and DNA to transfer to their offspring. They may appear as humans, but that appearance is just an outer facade to enable them to mingle with the humans, in a form and manner that humans would recognize, feel comfortable with, and would understand. Reason number 3 for why angels cannot have children. Because Jesus clearly tells us that angels do not marry. Therefore, if angels do not marry, then they cannot have wives. If they cannot have wives, then God did not intend for them to reproduce and multiply, like God commanded humans to do. If angels were not designed to reproduce, then it would be highly unlikely that these spirit beings would have the capacity to reproduce. Simply put, angels were not designed by God to have sex or to have children. So, to claim that angels can reproduce is simply speculating and making up things that cannot be backed by God's inspired word. Reason number 4 for why angels cannot have children. Those that believe that angels had sexual relations with women in the pre-flood era make that claim based on Genesis chapter 6 verses 1 and 2, which states, "When men began to multiply on the surface of the ground, and daughters were born to them, God's Son saw that men's daughters were beautiful, and they took any that they wanted for themselves as wives." So, the proponents of this angelic and human relationship narrative want you to believe that rebellious angels fell from heaven in battle with the Most High and His righteous angels, but once here on earth, these same rebellious angels decide to settle down, get married to a human, and raise a family. If that sounds silly to you, it's because that narrative truly is nonsense that goes against everything we know about Satan and the nature of his fallen angels. Yet, the proponents of this narrative draw their support from ancient mythology, and from texts like the Book of Enoch that make that very same claim. In the Book of Enoch, fallen angels are portrayed as loving husbands and fathers, which again is a silly Jewish mythology that only the gullible and naive would accept as truth. See our video on what truly happened in Genesis. Links to this and other videos will be in the description section. Reason number 5 for why angels cannot have children. Many think it is impossible for two humans to give birth to what the Bible describes as a giant, or to a Nephilim. Well, that is not as impossible as you think, because the definition of a giant that many people have in mind is not the same definition of a giant seen in the Bible. See our video on this subject for more details on the true height of biblical giants. Also, when the Bible describes the Nephilim, it always describes them as men. Not as hybrids, not as half-angels, not as gods, and not as aliens. No, the Nephilim were always seen as men. The reason for their strength and mutations can easily be explained as the result of demon possession, but they were always identified as men, as humans, and many times the Bible records their lineage, so we know they were not birthed from supernatural creatures. So, that is 5 quick reasons why angels cannot have children, and there are more that could be added, but these reasons should be sufficient to debunk this silly human-angelic relationship narrative. For more information, see our other videos, website, and books debunking the Book of Enoch.